Welcome to this week's edition of Red and Black Sport. Well, finally the curtains come down on the 2040 rugby season. So it seems to have been a marathon, doesn't it, this year? But the bad news is, of course, that the wider Crusader training squad are actually back in work, getting ready because it's an earlier start next year because of the Rugby World Cup. So to the All Blacks, they will thoroughly enjoy packing the gear away, leave it at the bottom of the suitcase and have a couple of months in the sun and the sea, I would think, and just winding down. Interesting game, wasn't it, at Millennium Stadium? My mate Wayne Barnes, remember I was there in 07 and we got knocked out by the Frogs. He really is a most strange man, I reckon. Some of the delaying tactics by the Welsh were just very hard to fathom, when in fact, you know, you don't have to take an injury break unless it's a crucial player. Well, that wasn't happening in the refereeing stakes, and it did slow it down. It frustrated the All Blacks, no two ways about it. A wonderful last 10 minutes. The first 60, you'd say, dragged a bit. But it came home to roost, didn't what Coach Hansen had been saying for some time. We need a group of 30-something All Blacks. And they did need the legs off the bench, didn't they, with 10 to go. And a sublime decision, actually, to take Barrett back to fullback and bring Colin Slade on to first five. It gave them the opportunity to kick to both corners, which was great. So I enjoyed that. To pick up, of course, the Coach of the Year, to pick up the Team of the Year, and Brody Retallick picking up the Player of the Year. Clean sweep by the All Blacks at the IRB Awards. Obviously things are tough in Britain with the IRB. They just gave the mugs and everything away on the Millennium Stadium. No big flash dinner like they used to have. So times are tough, I can see that. They're struggling a bit. And of course to Val Adams to pick up our first ever female athlete of the year. Wonderful achievement from that woman and a wonderful person. I've had the privilege of interviewing her and she's a wonderful person. But speaking of wonderful people, today, of course, it unfolded in a bit of a marathon, and it was a real test of nerves. But Lydia Ko took out what's the male equivalent of the FedEx Cup, the most points gained, $1 million US, and then had the nerve to go on and win the tournament worth $500,000. It took 4 playoff holes, and I loved her comment at the end. She said, I'm getting sick of the 18th, because all they did was go back up and down the 18th. But wonderful. She's way ahead of her time for a 17-year-old kid. There is no two ways about that. A maturity about her, a level-headedness, and I don't think she stopped smiling once in all the footage I watched this morning. So wonderful ambassador. Got ANZ on the shirt. No mistaking where she's from. She's a New Zealander. So terrific. Speaking of welcoming people, big crowd from overseas are in town for the entire week this week. They'll be based at the Fennelton Bowling Club, and it is the World Singles Championships. So that's in bowls we're talking about. And a real privilege to have the CE of World Bowls. He's an Englishman, but now living in Scotland. There's a lot of questions I want to ask him, but I mean, he'd be a hell of a good bloke because his name's Gary Smith. So how are you, Father? No, you're not actually. But
Great to be here, Peter.
Welcome to New Zealand. Not
Thank
your
you.
first visit here, of course.
No.
Let's just retrack the 4-year cycle that goes on. Christchurch have been privileged enough to have been singled out. Give us some of the reasons as to why the premier of World Bowls has found its home in Christchurch.
Well, this is the second package of such events, Peter. In the lead up to the 2008 World Championships, we had the Champion of Champions singles in 2005 and 2006, followed by the Asia Pacific in 2007. What a job New Zealand made of it, and Bowls New Zealand, and it was a pleasure to grant them the hosting rights for this package as well.
Now, not belittling our efforts at all, but were many other countries even interested in taking on a 4-year commitment?
Not in the same way, no. We do tend to get Australia are always in the mix there, and Australia did the last World Championships and did something similar. They had the Asia Pacific prior to that as well.
Gary, the format for the World Singles is a little different, isn't it? How do you get your competitors to compete?
Well, that's exactly right. It is different. It's the national singles champions from each of our member countries who are eligible to enter. If they are the current singles champion, as at the 31st of March this year, that's who can enter. So they have won their way through. They're not selected.
When you talk to some of these people, is it a real incentive? Is it a real carrot to chase at their nationals that they could actually get a chance to compete on the world stage?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's for a grassroots player, you know, it is the one chance they have got to end up with a world title. They're coming up against some of the competitors are, of course, seasoned internationals. So they're up against it, against those type of people.
But of course, we who are fellow bowlers know anybody can get tripped up on any given day, doesn't it? You don't need to be intimidated because you're playing someone who's been there before or whatever, do you?
Absolutely. I mean, it's an alternate game. Everybody is a national champion, so for some, it's just the first opportunity they've had to perform at this level.
So how many countries are in Christchurch for this week?
We've got 26 countries represented, with 23 men competitors and 18 women competitors.
Right. Any reason for the lack of numbers being even? I mean, do they have women's and men's championships globally?
Yes, they do.
Yeah.
Yes, they do. I mean, there is an element of some of the larger countries are lucky enough to be able to fund their players to come to these championships. Some of the smaller countries, the people have to fund themselves. Some have had major commitments this year with things like Commonwealth Games. So they're all working people.
Will it evolve that perhaps the world body will in fact subsidise these people?
Well, I think a lot more income would be required.
Right. So let's talk money. I hate swearing, but let's talk money. You know, what sort of shape globally is the game in financially?
I think it depends what part you talk about. When you look at the Australias of this world, where they're big business clubs who flourish because of the gaming machine side of things, they are big business, the big clubs in Australia. If you go to the UK, there's nothing that really compares with those types of clubs.
Do UK get television time?
There is an element of television time with some of the major indoor championships.
Ah, right. Yeah. Is that a weather factor more than anything? I mean, what's the length of season for an outdoor bowler?
Tends to be very much 6 months, 6 months, 5 months, 7 months, with the 7 months towards the indoor.
Right. So they'd get 5 months of summer, do you think?
You get well, I wouldn't call it summer in some places, but certainly 5 months of sufficient light and to be able to play evening play.
So when you got your registrations in for this one, were there some countries you were surprised to see had made it and were encouraged to see they'd made it?
Well, I was delighted to see Argentina.
Yes.
In the 11 years that we've been running this event, it's the first time Argentina have competed in this World Singles Championship.
And yet there'd be a lot of expats there, wouldn't there?
Yes, there are. And there are many countries like that where the sort of UK expat communities have established themselves. Places like Spain, Cyprus, etc. Are very much expats.
I remember last year's tour, I spoke to the Spanish guy and he said, well, you know, I played all my life in the UK. He said, no wonder I'm the Spanish champion. But, but they'd gone out there, they were living there and bowls were still there. I see countries like Norfolk Island. I think that's exciting to see them here. It must be a very small group of bowlers. They've got to fund it somehow.
Well, we did in fact have the World Singles Champion of Champions on Norfolk Island about 3 years ago. And they did a magnificent job, and it just showed that a smaller country, if they put the commitment into it, can host an event.
What a great effort, Norfolk Island. If you're from there, congratulations, well done. When we come back, we'll talk more about World Bowls. We'll go through the timetable, what you can expect to see over the next few days here in Christchurch. Welcome back. Just when we went to the break, we talked about Argentina being present here at the World Singles, and I saw Ali Forsyth demolish him this afternoon. So Ali Forsyth is our male representative. But let's go through the program with the CE, and we'll just talk about the format for, well, how long do we run this for this time?
It runs until Sunday.
Right.
It runs...
Started Monday.
Started Monday. And it's run in sections, first of all. So there's a round-robin sections, and that then progresses with the top of each section going straight to the semi-final, and the next two in each section going into a draw for a playoff. So what it does is it means that you reward those who win their section. They get at least a bronze medal.
Right. So how many games will they be playing before we get to semi-final time?
Well, it's between 8 and 9. With those, that amount of games, it's about consistency within the...
So they're getting, what, a couple of games a day anyway?
Yes, they are.
So it's quite intensive, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Given Canterbury's weather as well, their dear old mate, the easterly and the nor'wester, and a hot day today for some of them, but you'd never know, would you? It could change quick as a flash. So they get variable conditions as well.
Yep.
But the green, tell us about the green. That's one of the keys, isn't it?
Well, it is, because you've got those competitors from parts of the world where they would never have experienced the speed of greens, especially combined with the wind factor. The very speedy greens, you go to the UK, you're several seconds slower as a general outdoor.
Which we saw at the Commonwealth Games, didn't we?
Absolutely, yeah.
But is that one of the draw cards? Is that why Christchurch successfully bid and get again and again? Is the greens are so uniform, don't they?
Well, I think that's right. The standard of bowling green is a very important factor for hosting international events, and with the liaison that goes with the greens and the clubs for where we hold our World Championships across 3 venues in Christchurch, there's a good liaison to try and get them all playing of a similar pace and consistency.
I've had a go in Australia, but if we look at, say, the east coast of Australia, how would their greens pace-wise rate with, say, Canterbury?
I would say similar. I would say also that the different types of grass are a factor as well. But the great thing about Australia and New Zealand is the standard of the greenkeeping.
Because it's interesting, when we have the Trans-Tasman test, you really don't hear or see Australia bitching about having to play on greens here. So they must be comparable.
I think they're always confident. They're always going to be confident they're playing on fast greens. It means that you don't have to change your delivery style. And for many of those who are coming from the slower greens, it's a completely different delivery style that they've got to try and adapt to.
Let's go back to bowls in general. HQ, you've had to move from England to Scotland.
Yes.
The game originated in Scotland, am I correct?
Well,
there's an argument, isn't there?
Well, I think it depends who you're talking to. I mean, there's talk of the game originated with the Egyptians, and the bowls type implements have been found in the tombs of the pharaohs, etc. But the modern day game certainly developed from the UK.
So your headquarters are in where in Scotland?
Just on the outskirts of Edinburgh.
All right.
Yes.
And the move up for you from UK or from England, didn't find it too tough?
No. Well, I was lucky enough. I played for England for 20 years in bowls, and I was welcomed up there, which is I'm glad to say, because
Did you win a Scottish title?
Yes, we have. I have been a member of a combination team in West Lothian. I'm still loved.
So, in your brief, how many countries of governance do you have?
We have about 50.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. And that's growing?
And that's grown. When I first got the job with World Bowls...
How long ago was that?
It's 13 years ago.
Oh,
now.
Right. Yeah.
There were 36 members of World Bowls countries. There are now 50. So, and we've introduced in recent years another level of membership for development members.
Oh, right.
Before, it was very difficult to get membership because a country had to have a compliant green. But now we've managed to bring in another level of membership, which gives a country who've got a body of people who really want to drive the game forward, a transitional period.
Do you give us a financial aid for that as well?
Well, what we do is we have a structure now, a regional structure, and we really try and pull on the resources of our major national authorities in those regions, those who have got the experience and the personnel to lend in terms of coaching and umpiring and marking and general infrastructure.
Is there a change in emphasis from it being a Commonwealth game to now a far broader game?
That is certainly the case. In recent years, obviously, we've seen Malaysia, who hadn't even played the game before the 1998 Commonwealth Games, now a major force in the game.
I think when I spoke to Malaysia when they were here last year, there has been a tremendous amount of funds been put in. That's a sport they've targeted to do well globally, haven't they?
And I think that's what countries do need to do. In Malaysia, they actually took young players and they made them almost professional. They gave them the money to concentrate on playing bowls and rewarded them when they did well. Because
they're not really, I'm trying to think of any iconic sport that Malaysia would be strong in, so they've picked that one and they're reaping the rewards, aren't they?
They certainly are.
Has it become a bit of a role model for other countries? Are you encouraging them to do the same?
Well, I certainly think they are a great example, but that one is probably driven by finance, and maybe not every country is in that position to do it. Then that's where you need the support of other major national
The other
authorities.
positive they've got, of course, they're not competing against many other sports, are they? I mean, if you look at funding requirements for sport in New Zealand, it's very far-flung, isn't it? And it's quite a thin spread that you can give it, where if it's one of your focal sports, is there another country like Malaysia that just really do button down on bowls?
Not so much. I mean, obviously, what we would love to see is somebody like China really get a grip of it, and it would solve everybody's financial problems in terms of affiliation fees, etc. If you get 1% of them playing.
Need a bloody lot of greens in Christchurch if they decide to all turn up. But is it likely that could happen?
Well, one of the great things is that we've got a very strong base at Hong Kong.
Yes.
Very much.
Which is now part of China.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So there is expertise on hand. And
have they shown any expression of interest?
Well, they are now a member of World Bowls. They're
Good.
building greens.
At that second tier? Or?
No, a full member.
Full member?
They are a full member and do hold Asian championships, and there's an Asian championships going ahead just next month.
Just very quickly before we go to the break, it's not really surprising because they are huge travellers now, aren't they? They get around the world, they see what's going on.
Yep.
Yeah, not surprising. When we come back, we'll continue on with the format of what we can expect this week, though, here in Christchurch with the World Bowls. Welcome back. We're having a fascinating chance to catch up about bowls on a global scene, but of course Christchurch have really put a stake in the ground for hosting big bowls events. Why? Because they do it jolly well, and you know, they bid for it, and with sanctioning by the world body, you know, away we go. So we've got 4 years of it, which is really exciting. Any favourites that you can sort of think of at this stage that may take out the singles? Well, it's important it is co-ed as well, isn't it? You have men's and women's, so it's important we point that out.
Yes. Obviously, Ali Forsyth, homegrown and used to the conditions and a great player, will be probably a strong favourite for the men's title. But he'll be pushed, I think, by David Holt from Australia, an old England colleague of mine, actually.
Oh.
So, yeah, I know David well, very classy player. And there's Bobby Donnelly. He's just come back from Glasgow with a world triples gold and a past singles champion.
Women?
Women, well, I'll try not to be too biased because my wife, who's representing Scotland, was runner-up last year.
Right.
And
where was that at?
That was at Burnside.
Oh, Burnside, yeah.
And so, obviously, from a personal point of view, I'd like to see her go one better because we've got a few bottles of champagne on ice back home.
Can you jack the draw CE? Can you?
No, I have to stay out of these things and... No.
Just checking.
Yeah.
It's like the same as I'd like to win lotto, but I don't know the person who puts the balls in the barrel, but that's okay. We'll work with it. Tell me, from this, well, we run through until Sunday. Sharp end really is the weekend, but, you know, there's some very good players on display. I was amazed when I was there today. The quality of the bowls is great in tricky conditions. So, okay, from there, our next time, is it around this time of the year again? We host again.
That's right. You've got the Asia Pacific in 2015, which is a very, very important event because it is a qualification event for the 2016 World Championships.
Right.
There is that event, and we have an Atlantic Championships, which will be hosted in Cyprus at the same time, which is the other half of the world qualification.
So what sort of numbers can we expect for next year?
Well, you can expect in the 20s for each discipline.
And you back to Burnside?
And it's at Burnside and Fendleton, I believe.
Right,
and,
okay.
Yep.
All right, let's go to the Commonwealth Games.
Yes.
From New Zealand's perspective, not quite the results that they'd hoped for. And I don't think you can blame conditions. They knew what they were going to go to. They'd practiced on greens and tried to replicate what was there. Your overall impression of the Commonwealth Games as far as bowls went?
I thought it was a fantastic event, to be honest. Not just because it's back in my home part of the world in Glasgow, but I think they did a marvellous job.
Crowds seemed good.
Excellent crowds, good conditions generally. In fact, unusually warm the first week. But there was some exceptional performances. South Africa was the star performer, and of course Scotland had some big wins as well.
Because those greens in South Africa would not replicate Scotland, would they?
No, they would probably be in the middle between
Yes.
UK greens and the Southern Hemisphere, Australian, New Zealand greens.
Is it like anything? It's what to get anything out of it, you've got to put a heck of a lot into it.
Yes, I think, you know, compatibility comes into it as well. It isn't just about being able to being a good player, but it's about getting a good team ethic together and feeding off of each other.
And great support that they had at Edinburgh, there's no two ways about that. The whole Games were an outstanding success, I thought, as were the London Olympics.
Yes.
You know, you can prove that you guys can do it. Ever see it as an Olympic sport?
We are trying very, very hard to raise the profile. We've been fortunate enough earlier this year to be a standalone recognised international federation for WADA, which is a very important part from the anti-doping side of things. And we are strongly lobbying Olympic bodies, national governing bodies.
Because Canada play it, don't they? But do the states play it?
Yes, United States are represented here at the Champion of Champions.
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
So you need the big market, like China would be great, wouldn't it, if you could secure that, which we already talked about.
Yes.
The blight on sport at the moment, you touched on it with WADA, drug testing and match fixing. Bowls could be a match fixing sport pretty easily. You know, it's not hard to put a bad one down, believe me. You guys taking steps in those areas?
Well, we have a code of conduct. Each of our players signs a code of conduct for all our events now. There's certain ways that were played previously that we don't play now in terms of what we do at the last knockings of a tournament with random draws for the draw for, say, the quarter-final playoffs. Once upon a time when 4 went through from each section and 1 played 4 and 2 played 3 and the other one...
Because it is a sport in Asia, isn't it? You know, which tends to be the hub of the sports betting industry.
Yes,
yeah, it's something you've got to watch. Young players globally, are you picking them up? Are you giving them a game they want to play?
Well, we'd like to think so. The different formats, the sets formats, the sharper formats, the more exciting formats for TV. I was fortunate enough, going back a few years, to be very much part of the television scene, both as a player and on administration, back in the UK with TV bowls and adapting from the old 21 up to the sets play and respotting the jack and...
The coloured bowls now, the clothing side of it.
Yep.
There seems to be a more an open door policy by bowling clubs too, doesn't it? To get social bowls up and running.
Important. I think it really does start at the bowling club itself, how welcoming you make people. I think governing bodies can only do so much in terms of what they do with the sport, but at the crux is really somebody walking through your gate, being welcomed.
There's two great
having
factors that make it work in Australia, isn't it? The kids love it, and the weather's great. And that's the 2 ingredients you really want, isn't it? Yeah. Gary, it's been an absolute pleasure. Travel well over the week. Hope your wife goes okay. I mean, to run her up to the New Zealand Lass, that'll be fine. We wouldn't mind that at all. We'll do another Red and Black Sport this time next week.